at Bunker. So that's a bit of Gaelic to start off. What I just said to you was firstly 100,000 welcomes to everybody who's here. And secondly I said, my name is Sean Mackell and I am from Ireland. And Ireland is the land where your ancestors come from. So can I just check here, is there anybody in this room with Irish blood? Put your hand up if that's the case.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I said we got people with Irish blood. Right? Yes.
I'm an outlaw.
Everybody, right? So if that's the case, there's only one thing that you could say. If you're Irish, come into the parlour, there's a welcome here for you. And if your name is Timothy or Pat, as long as you come from Ireland, there's a welcome on the mat. And if you come from the Mountains of Morin or Killarney's lake so blue, we'll sing you a song, we'll make a fuss. Whoever you are, you're one of us. You're Irish, this is the place for you. Indiana. Firstly, I want to say that, you know, in order to know I believe that in order for you to know where you're going to, you've got to know where you came from, right? And the vast majority of people here in this room came from two small little places in Northern Ireland. They came from James Mackell and a lady called Mary Campbell. And James Mackell was born in Derry, and on the one of the big maps there's a little cross with a circle around it, and it's in a very small place, and the small place is called the Craig, C-R-E-A-G-H, right? And she came from a place called Clonlow, and that's in County Tyrone. And normally the Derry ones don't like the Tyrone ones, and the Tyrone ones don't like the Derry ones, but for some reason or other, the two of them met. They decided to get married, and I think DJ can show it at some stage what the marriage certificate said. And then they went on an appalling journey from Ireland right over to Indiana. A journey that probably took about 3 months or so. And against all the odds, they arrived in Indiana. And the rest of you know what happened to them. You're all descended from them. So I think it's only fair to say a little thing firstly about our name, because there are variations of our name. Our name, the ELLs, is the oldest version of the name, right? And it dates back, there's records back to 1715 about Thomas Mackell, right, who was involved in a rebellion against the English. And the outcome of that was that he was arrested in Belfast, and he was sold into becoming a servant on the east coast of America. And on 1715 on the ship, the Friendship, and it wasn't very friendly to him, was then sent across to America. And that's the first that we have known about where the Mackells, the first areas when we know. Our name itself sometimes gets mixed up with M-A-C-K-L-E's, M-A-C-K-E-L's, M-A-C-K-I-L-L, M-A-C-K-A-L-L. And the reason that that all happened was that we were poor people. We were persecuted because of our religion by the English. We had no schools. We weren't allowed to go to school until 1829. And a lot of people here be saying, that's really cool, don't have to go to school. With the result then, it was only very basic reading and writing that we would have got. And in those circumstances, you're relying upon somebody else to write down your name for you, as opposed to you writing it down yourself. And that's why there's variations of our name. And if you look at James Mackell's wedding certificate, it's spelled M-A-C-K-E-L. And if you look,
capital K.
Capital K, right? See it there? So it's M-A-C-K-E-L. And he married Mary Campbell on the 15th of September in 1845. So that's about 170 years ago that has survived. And that, there's a page of the actual book there where that is from. And the best man on the day was a man called Pat O'Neill, and the bridesmaid was Kate Carr. And the difficulty is that Tyrone is full of Carrs and it's full of O'Neills, so that wasn't much help to us. A year later, when the first child came, nine months and 2 weeks, when the first child arrived, the name was then spelt in the records as M-A-C-K-L-E.
Right here.
Right? So there's it there. James Mackell and Mary Campbell. right? And the reason that was, firstly, the priest would have written that down in the big book. He didn't show it to anybody, and it was just what he heard, what he felt as he wrote it down. And I know that there's been a bit of controversy in your family between the Mackells and the Michaels, right? And the reality is that they didn't know what their names were either. In fact, in Tyrone, they pronounced Mackell as Mackell, right? There's our Mackell, meaning there's our Mackell. So they've got the Tyrone accent's an awful accent, right? The Derry accent's a nicer accent, right? So they would call Mackell, right? So they're the same crowd as well. There is no family of Michaels. They are Mackells, so they are from that. If there's any Michaels here, I'm sorry, but that's what it is. All our names would come from the Gaelic because we would go back a long time in Ireland through sort of the Irish and the Gaelic. And when you translate our name, it generally means son of the servant. So it comes from Magilla. And then when that became hard, when the British came in, they couldn't pronounce the Gaelics, and they would say, it's not Magilla, it's Mackell, right? It means son of the servant. So that means that when you all come to Ireland to find your roots, there's no big farms, right? There's no castles, things like that. Or to put it, another way, we were pretty lonely, so we were, right? And mind you, there is an old man that I met about 10 years ago in Tombridge, which is about 7 miles from where the Mackells were from. And his name was John Mackell, and he insisted that it was a wrong interpretation of our name. And he said that on the 4th century, when St. Patrick came to Ireland, St. Patrick, as you know, was the patron saint of Ireland, and he was the main man, he decided that he wanted to build a cathedral in County Armagh, which is at the bottom of Loch Ness. And Derry means the oak wood, and that's why I have some things to give out later on. And you'll see the sort of the acorn for Derry, and so there's a huge big oak wood there. So they decided then that they would get the wood from the oak forest, and they would use that to build the cathedral in Armagh. But it was quite a distance to bring the wood, so they didn't know what they were going to do. And the Mackells, who were boatmen, said, put the wood onto the boats, we'll take them down Loch Ness, we'll take them off at the bottom of Loch Ness, and it's only 6 miles or so to Armagh at that stage. And he said because of that, we then were given the name Son of the Servant of God, right? Meaning that we were connected with St. Patrick. Now, I want to take a vote here, right? Do you want the Mackells to be associated with scum, or would you prefer that we are associated with St. Patrick? St. Patrick. This is, by the way, this is the World Convention of the Mackells here. Right? The word are here. So we decide what it is. So anyway, that's agreed now that we are direct descendants of St. Patrick. I'm going to spend just a little minute to run through the next bit, because what happened was that where we were in Loch Ness, we were fishermen. The ground up there is bad. In fact, the name of the place, the Crack, translates as poor pasture. Because in Ireland we didn't have zip codes, so what you would have done is that you would have given your little bit of ground a name, and that would be something that you would see. For example, the nearest place to us, on one side of the road is the Crack, and the other side of the road is Ballymcguigan, right? And Ballymcguigan means place or town of the McGuigans. So on that side of the road is a whole pile of McGuigans, so that was known as Ballymcguigan, right? Further up, if you ever come to Ireland, you'll see these places called Kill, K-I-L-L, which is a bit frightening to say the least, but Kill means church. And where I live now is Kildare, which means, Kildare means the church of Dara, all right? Kilkenny, the church of Kenny. So you'll see a lot of kills, and you'll see a lot of valleys around the place. And we're living there in reasonable harmony. There was an Irish king that we were associated with, who were the O'Neills, who were the High Kings of Ireland. And they lived about 12 miles from where we were. And unfortunately what happened was that the British kept on invading the English. And in 1607, they eventually defeated the Irish Kings, and the Irish Kings fled the country. And that was known as the Flight of the Eyres, and they ended up across the world. right? And the English then set about dismantling the Irish system and replacing it with an English Protestant system, right? And what they did was that they took the land, they gave it then to these big corporations of the day, and the big corporations then ruled them as sort of private fiefdoms. When I say big corporations, they were different than the corporations that we have today. So, for example, adjacent to Ballyronan and Crack where we were, there was a place called Draperstown. So it was the association of drapers, people that made clothes, that they came over and they got that. Where we were along the Loch Shore, they gave it to the salters. And the salters were the people before refrigerators. They salted food. And and there's actually a town called Salters Town, which they did, right? So they had their own armies. And because of that then, there was always unrest. And there were rebellions against this. And then the English then brought in these things called the penal laws. And the penal laws even made things worse, because under the penal laws, for example, they abolished the Catholic religion. It was permissible to kill a priest on sight. Right? I know a few priests like that at the moment in Ireland, but that's what could be done over there. They closed the churches. So the Irish, being resourceful, they then would go to the mountains or whatever. If you found a big rock that was on its side or whatever, then the priest would say Mass halfway up a mountain on the rock, and they were called Mass rocks, right? So the next time you're sort of at Mass, and you're saying to yourself, oh, the traffic's brutal, all right? And you know, it's sort of windy in here. Well, you could be stuck halfway up a mountain in Ireland, you know, at the Mass rock with the rain coming in sideways at you, right? They wouldn't allow us to go to school. So again, what happened to keep the sort of a little bit of education going, the priests then would have had hedgerow schools, and under the hedges, they would have then taught basic reading or writing, you know, to the children, and they were called the hedge schools in Ireland. They abolished graveyards for us. We couldn't be buried, so you'd have had a burial place, and the burial place would not be recognised. The graveyards were all for the Episcopalians, the Anglican faith, and they did dreadful things. So with the result then, that by the time it came into the 1800s, it was a pretty bad place to be, right? One of the worst things that they actually did was they brought in a thing called the Property Act, and the Property Act only applied to Catholics. And what it said was that if you had a bit of ground and you left it in your will, it had to be divided equally between all your children. And since you probably would have about 10 children anyway, because you needed them to keep the farm going, and you'd lose a few through, you know, sickness and whatever, it meant then that if you had 100 acres, after one generation, you could have people maybe having 12 acres each or something like that. And then in the next generation, when that person died, it was then divided up against another 10 children, whatever. And really in 2 generations, the farms became completely uneconomical. And the only thing that really grew in great numbers for people at that time were potatoes. And that's where the potatoes came. And I remember once speaking to someone saying, after the potato famine, and they said we couldn't have eaten pasta or rice. And the answer was no, because we didn't have that, you only had potatoes. Yeah. And in fact, when James Mackell was working there in the 1830s and the 1840s, I can tell you what his diet was. I can describe it to you. Do you want that? Firstly, he would be around about 5'6". He would have weighed about 140 pounds. Mary Campbell would have been around about 5'2". She would have weighed about 112 pounds. And their diet consisted of, in the morning, potatoes and milk. And lunchtime would have been potatoes and milk. And dinner time would have been potatoes and milk, right? Or if they were lucky and they got a bit of rabbit or something like that, they could have had that. They could have foraged for mushrooms, and then in the autumn they could have taken berries or whatever. So it was a poor diet. Incidentally, on average, a man would have eaten every day 5 pounds of potatoes, which is a lot of potatoes, right? They were cooked in a 3-legged iron pot, and the house that they would have had was called a fisher's cot, right? And because it was a small little house, because they were out on the water most of the time, and they were in a little cabin on the boat, and lived on the boat, or else they would have had this little house. And it would have been no longer than the width of this room, and it probably would be as wide as from the wall to me and up to there. It would have been a clay floor, with maybe straw, and then down the far end, there would have been space for the cow, and the cow would have lived at night in the house. And the reason he was put into the house was two reasons. Firstly, that's where you got your milk, and secondly, if you left him outside, somebody might rob him. So he was brought in to make sure that didn't happen. And then during the night, he was central heating, because he would give off heat, and that would keep things warm, for that. And as well as that, he then would have done his business, and then you'd have gathered all that up in the morning, and then you would have dug that into the field, and that would have fertilised, the potatoes and everything, along that. So it was a hard, hard life, at that particular time. Again, there would have been uprisings, against the English, but the English sort of we had things called pikes, which are big long sticks with a spearhead at the end of it, and they had guns, so you could see who was going to win those aspects. The Irish famine started in 1845, and very quickly there was a charge of people out of Ireland, right? And the first thing they had to do was to get the money to get on a ship. And that was very difficult, because if you were working, luckily enough James Mackell was working, he was hauling freight on his boat at that stage. But if people found it very hard to get the money. John has told me, and I think he's absolutely right, that James Campbell, who was the brother of Mary Campbell, he had come over to Indiana and he had done well for himself. And he sent the money to bring them across. And if he hadn't have done that, then they wouldn't have been able to come across, and they may have died in Ireland, or they may have, perished somewhere else in bad form from that. So the first thing then was that you had to then get a ship that would take you over, and it's not like today we go on the internet and then you pick your journey, etc., etc. They would have gone in their case to Derry, or if you're a Protestant, you would call it Londonderry. And to the day, it's still the same. Catholics call it Derry, the Protestants call it Londonderry. And I believe they got on a ship in Derry Harbour, and they headed to the New World. Right? Now, the ship they were on was a sailboat. It had 3 masts, and it would have up to 400 people on the boat. And if you can imagine, the downstairs would have been, say, like this room, right? There we are. And you had cots, or bunks as we would call them. And on average they would have been perhaps a little bit wider than one of these tables. And it wouldn't be as long. And there were wooden planks, slotted planks that were in, and hay. And when you went on to that boat, you brought your possessions with you, and you brought your food with you for a trip that was supposed to last 6 weeks, or it could be 8 weeks or longer. You got a loaf of bread from the ship, or supposedly got a loaf of bread from the ship every day, and you were 23 hours under deck every day. There's a family above you, maybe 2 families above you, and then you were then families beside you, right? And the interesting fact was, firstly, no bathrooms. There was a pail, and when you needed to go to the bathroom, then you had this pail, and of course, everybody else is sitting around. Not happening today, and you're up in the corner, so that wouldn't be nice at all. So one of the big issues was that not too many of the ships sunk, but disease was rife, and the most common disease was cholera. And once it went onto a ship, then it would go through. That's why they were called coffin ships, because in many instances, when the ship got to America, then perhaps half the people were dead. When she got on the ship, she had a baby in her arms, wrapped up in a blanket, and she had a baby in her stomach, because she was pregnant as well. And she did that trip across there through appalling weather, because you leave Ireland and you head up towards Iceland, and then you do a dive to the left, which that's where the currents go, and then brings it towards Canada. But the Irish didn't want to go to Canada because the English ruled Canada, and they didn't trust it. They wanted to go to America. So it was a hard journey, and some people didn't make it. Other people then who got there, had little or no money. They would have been standing up in the clothes that they had. Some people who were particularly poor couldn't afford to go down into the cabin, and they spent the journey upstairs on the actual deck, and they would have had some sort of tarpaulin or some blankets or whatever, and there could have been 150 or whatever huddled together upstairs in the storms of the North Atlantic. So it was a hard time for them to get. When they arrived in America, we know then that they headed for for Pennsylvania, and that's where James Mackell was born. Is that right, John? So she must have been well on in her time that we ended up going to Pennsylvania, and then after a while from Pennsylvania they moved across to Montgomery in Indiana, and that was where James Campbell had set himself up as a trading post. Now if you think about what America was like by the time that they actually got there, and the first thing is that in 1845 Jesse James was born that year, right? You had other things that were going on, like there's a little town, I think it's called Yarba Booba or something like that decided to change its name to Hollywood, right? Thomas Edison was born that year as well. So America was a very wide open country that wasn't being developed. So they were real pioneers, and they went out, dug a farm, and he made a farm. But before he did that, we believe, he worked on a flat-bottom boat for James Campbell, who ran trade from Montgomery down to New Orleans. And there's obituaries there and refers to flat-bottom boats, and flat-bottom boats are the boats that he would have used in Ireland, right? Sometimes they're called barges, sometimes we call them lighters. But and Campbell was using those. So I think when he came across, that's what he worked at, and then he moved on to the farm at that particular time. I don't want to say too much more at this stage, except I can tell you what happened on their last day before they got on the boat. And what happened was that the last day before they got on the boat, firstly, it had been a heartbreaking place, because once you got on that boat, you were never coming back, right? James Campbell did come back once, and he was a wealthy man.